about Turkey. And we entitled this program "From Doha to Jeddah. Finally, a true Arab Spring begins." So just very briefly, what does the title mean for American audiences might not be clear. Doha is the capital of Qatar. And in 2012, a meeting was held in which most of the Arab countries were there, the United States, Turkey. And in that meeting, essentially, the plan was how would these countries basically partition Syria, overthrow the government and partition Syria. And Turkey, as we will see, had a very key role in all that. Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. It's an event that happened just a few weeks ago. And basically that event marks the failure of U.S. policy in Syria and Syria's re-entry into the Arab League, or as we put it, the Arab League coming back to Syria. And it was also a defeat not only for the United States, but for Turkey as well. And Turkey has shifted gears. So that's what we want to talk about today. And we want to put it in some historical perspective for you. And so, I mean, Turkey is a very interesting country. Let's keep in mind, 80 million people, strategically located, very rich history. All that I think is rather well known. But Turkey has actually gone through a transition, if you like, from strong NATO member to it remains in NATO, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in the future in this broadcast. But it's turning increasingly towards the east, towards China and Russia and Iran and India. So with that in mind, Ibrahim, we've used the term, quote, the Turkish model. What are we talking about when we use that term? And can you talk a little bit also in your introductory remarks about what we saw at the University of Denver's Korbel School of International Studies just before the Arab Spring began, 2008, 2009, that period?
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Rob. I think before I get to your last comment or your last point regarding Korbel, which both of us were present at the time, I need to outline few things that I believe are very fundamental to the study of Turkey and understanding its geopolitical as well as foreign policy issues. Nations that were once great empires often have an inflated sense of, call it, their heyday, making their citizens easy to inspire with the appeal to the past. We see it in the United States, in United Kingdom and other places. And unfortunately, this appeal to the past makes the population vulnerable to being manipulated by politicians. When it comes to study of Turkey, this romantic view of the collapsed Ottoman Empire continues to shape how Turkey views their place in the world today. So understanding that past is critical in understanding the current dynamics or geodynamics of Turkey. Tayyip Erdogan's approach to global and regional affairs represents both continuity of the past, desire to go back to that greatness of empire, on the Ottoman Empire, as well as little bit of change. In around 1923, which the current Turkey began to shape itself under Kemal Atatürk, there was a shift by the Turkish leaders to let go of at least cultural, social, even religious issues related with the Ottomans and move towards the West and copy the Western constitution, Western language, etc., etc., in an attempt that their shift wasn't because they didn't want to associate or search for that great empire. They wanted it, but the strategy was that we are going to use the Western model to gain that greatness of the empire that we have lost. When it came to Erdogan, he wanted to do both. He wanted to continue on that path of establishing the inflated, his romantic understanding of the collapsed Ottoman Empire, but in a way that at least from 2003, when he came to power, to 2010, where your point was regarding the Turkish model and the beginning of the Arab uprising, he still continued along the path of staying within the European modality. Around 2010, 2011, that first phase, the secular mindset is disappeared, particularly when Erdogan defanged the military and began to create its own model for the establishment of, or getting back to the heyday of Ottoman Empire by becoming the leader or the most influential country in the Middle East. That the country, Turkey, as both secular and religious, served the purpose of United States as well as European country. This is why during that period of 2009, 2010, particularly early 2011, when the Arab Spring began, we could hear left, right, and center. Even if you remember, your colleagues and my colleagues at Corbel, they were taking students to Turkey to show them that model, the Turkish model, that how you can somehow synthesize between the religious aspect as well as the secular aspect, rather than separate these two together. Up to 2011, that was the desire for Erdogan, that he searched for the collapsed empire, or Ottoman Empire, and influence in the region through somehow closeness to the West. Then he shifts, particularly when he, after many attempts by Turkey to join the European Union and being rejected, etc., etc., that strategy changes slightly, and Erdogan begins to search for a different, reviewing the Turkish foreign policy, and uses this Arab Spring, the newly developed Arab Spring, as a springboard for now achieving its goal, Turkish goal of becoming a new Ottoman power within the region on the back of the Arab Spring. This is why immediately it supported Muslim Brotherhood and the rapprochement with Qatar. So they created a triangular kind of power in the region, where Qatar was financing, Muslim Brotherhood was providing the ideological sense, and military as well as foreign policy was dictated by Turkey. Unfortunately for Turkey, that modality failed because they, as so to speak, they put all their eggs in one basket by only supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. When Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt failed, all the hope for Turkey to become the new Ottoman empire of the region went down the drain with it. Erdogan searched for an alternative strategy that would somehow recompensate for the failure, and began around 2014 and 2000. Although Erdogan was the key factor in trying to break down Syria with the help of Qatar and Muslim Brotherhood in Doha and creating the Doha Protocol. But began, once the failure took place, Erdogan began to search for an alternative way of getting closer to Russia and changing his policy with Iran, with Syria, changing his policy with Iran, and trying to get closer to Iran. So the Turkish model, we can talk about this. The first phase is the same old attempt to become the influential Ottoman rulers, or at least a substitute for the Ottoman rulers in the region, but being close to the West. Once it failed to achieve its goal, the strategy changed and directed, as you quite rightly indicated, moved towards the East. And this is why it began to buy weapons of S-400 from Russia, collaboration with Iran, collaboration with China, etc., etc., etc. So when we talk about it, I know this is a kind of a very condensed and short answer to the question. When we talk about Turkish model or Erdogan's model, the first phase from 2003 to 2010. The second phase from 2010 up to recently, at least 2016, 2017, particularly when Erdogan realized that the Russians have come to Syria and disintegration of Syria is not going to happen. With the help of the Iranians, Hezbollah and others, Syrian regime is going to survive. So the strategy changed towards the east and some kind of rapprochement with others. You want to add anything?
Yes. I want to add a couple of points here. I'm thinking, when you're referring to the Ottoman Empire. So early on, what we heard about Erdogan and his policy, it's referred to as neo-Ottomanism, i.e., the new Ottoman Empire. And of course, part of the goal of that empire was to expand Turkey's influence into Turkish-speaking areas in Central Asia, but also to move back into the Middle East, and particularly into Syria and Iraq, and to try to basically annex parts of that. That was part of the deal in terms of what Turkey was doing in Syria. And I was just thinking about an expression that I heard years ago, that so many countries, they have the map on the wall, which is basically their present boundaries, and the map in their drawer. And the map in their drawer is, if you like, their wish list of how they would like to expand. And so Erdogan's early, that is to say 2008 to 2016, let's say, map in the drawer was basically to take hunks of Syria, to overthrow Assad, and to take hunks of Syria and also hunks of Iraq. And this policy of his utterly failed. All right.
Remember, Rob, in 1929 to 1930 something, the original map of Syria, part of it was annexed by Kemal Atatürk.
What's it? Alexandria. That's the name.
Yes, the Alexandria. Was annexed by the Turkish government at the time, and the Syrian government wasn't strong enough, and the French didn't want to fight for it. So that annexation, the map in the drawer, literally had the desire to annex a further chunk. Once you break Syria and Syrian regime disintegrates, and you divide this into small enclaves, the weak enclaves will not be able to support the integrity of the land. The Turkish government will be able to annex further chunks in the north, as the Israelis did, and others. And even in Iraq, they had a plan in the northern Iraq. because there was some disputed area in the northern Iraq. But it didn't happen. So the plan is still there. The desire for what we call going back to the old collapsed Ottoman Empire is still there. But it became untenable under the new dynamics that is shaping or at least dictating the regional policy. And Turk had no other alternative but to zigzag and try to maneuver between these various possibilities and see what's the best that they can do under the circumstance.
All right, and there's something else that's important to mention here, because we're talking about Turkey, but really the role that Turkey is playing in all this is basically a proxy for Washington. It's one of a number of proxies, and what's going to change is Turkey's relationship to Washington over the years, over the decade from 2010, if you like, to today, 2023, whatever. That Turkey is not playing the same role anymore. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of what the U.S. posture is. And in order to do that, one of the things we need to talk about is we have to go back in time even beyond 100 years. We have to go back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, because what we're really seeing is what this plan was to partition Syria. I consider it Sykes-Picot 2.
Yes, you're right.
So for those of you that are unfamiliar with this, the Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret agreement originally between the Russian Empire, Great Britain, and France to carve up the Middle East, to carve up what was the Ottoman Empire, and to divide it between these three imperial powers. The Russian Revolution took place, and the communists come to power in the Soviet Union comes into being, and one of the first things that Lenin does is to expose, if you like, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the secret agreement. And so the agreement itself is essentially Russia's out of it, and it's an agreement between France and Britain, and they basically just carve up the entire Middle East. They partition it. And the partitioning of this region has a number of purposes. First, the colonizing entities are competing with each other, so that's one part of it. But what really the heart of the matter was to keep the Middle East from being, quote, a single Arab nation, and to divide it up into chunks that would be more manageable for colonizers to deal with, or later on imperialists to deal with. And so I mention this because the current structure of the Middle East today is based on Sykes-Picot 1. So what is Sykes-Picot 2? Well, Sykes-Picot 2 is basically an American plan. I'm not sure exactly when it dates from, but we do know in 2006, when there was the Israeli attempted invasion of Lebanon, and the Lebanese fought back, Hezbollah fought back, that there's a famous statement of Condoleezza Rice, who talked about the creation of the new Middle East. And basically what the new Middle East was about was the further partitioning of the region. And we could see that. We could see what happened in Iraq. And in Iraq, what we're seeing is what I would call a de facto partition. That is to say, it remains one country, but really it's divided into these three sections that hardly relate to each other. Then we saw the destruction in Libya, another partition. And basically, what the plan for Syria was to break it up into smaller pieces. And
Rob,
the failure of the United States and its proxies, particularly Turkey in this case, but others were involved as well. We can talk about that. This really represents a big turning point, the failure of Sykes-Picot 2.
Rob, what you said regarding Condoleezza Rice in 2006 was absolutely correct. But if we go back to around 2001, General Clark has a comment and it's available on YouTube.
Yes.
He said that he visited the I think Ministry of Defense Department, or CIA, and over there they were talking about a plan for not only occupying five countries in the region. Iran was one of them, Syria, Afghanistan, and a few others, Libya. But the primary goal at that time was to break these countries up. This is 2001. Break these countries up into smaller enclaves. The 2003 occupation of Iraq, there was a blueprint to divide Iraq into three sections: the Kurds in the north, the Arabs somewhere in the middle. I remember arguing against this at a lecture that I gave in Cornell in one of these presentations, and the Shiites on the south. So the plan for Iraq was quite clear: break it up. Syria, the Doha Protocol was, again, as you said quite correctly, is part of the Sykes-Picot II, further breaking up of the region. Also, it is significant when the Daesh and the terrorists occupied Iraq, northern Iraq, and they overrun the border between Iraq and Syria. As their pickup trucks were getting into Syria, they said it's the reversal of the Sykes-Picot one.
Yeah, so they were conscious of that. Yes,
so they were mindful of the fact that the Sykes-Picot was the one that divided the region into small enclave, and Doha Protocol was supposed to be the blueprint, or at least the first stage, for Sykes-Picot II. And then ultimately came the 2006 and Condoleezza Rice and everything else that happened after.
All right, so Ibrahim, what we have though is by 2016, 2017, this period when the Russians enter into at the invitation of the Syrian government, and basically the plans to partition Syria and to overthrow the government fail at that point. So certainly one part of this, what I call this Turkish tango, its change in orientation, has to do with its understanding that it was not, its plans for Syria had failed.
Yes.
But there are other things that are going on another level, Ibrahim, and that is on the economic and social level. And that has to do with Turkey's frustration in dealing with Europe, both immigration issues, which were very serious, but also just economic opening up, if you like, the failure of the European Union to admit Turkey into its ranks. And, you know, Turkey's being rejected, basically. Turkey's being rejected by the EU. So there's that political aspect, but there's also the economic aspect. And the economic aspect is the action in the global economy is in the East. It's not, it hasn't completely disappeared in Europe, but Europe and North America, in terms of economic relations, are offering Turkey less and less. And Turkish opportunities are in Central Asia, in Russia, in China. And these opportunities, we should talk a little bit about that, because I'm convinced it's not just the failure, if you like, of Sykes-Picot II, of the Doha protocols, but the very nature of the changes that are taking place in the global economy, that Turkish opportunity is, this longing to be part of Europe is really shrinking among the Turks.
Sure. Turkish desire to become part of the European Union was primarily driven by its desire for economic. Yes. And but once it didn't happen, but when it comes to the failure of Erdogan in at least the Middle East, one social factor that Erdogan somehow ignored and thought that being close, at least within the first period, with being close to United States will compensate for it. The historical, what we call, somebody said the historical antibodies in the Middle East Erdogan did not realize that many Arabs, like many Greeks, still view Turkey quite negatively as their former colonial overlord. Ankara would, in addition to the miscalculation of only putting its own eggs in one basket, but this social factor would not allow Turkey to be able to dictate or at least command the region the way it wants, so that ultimately becomes it is able to establish the old empire. In addition to the fact that Europe wasn't able to provide anything for it, all the money at the moment, all the development or the economic development and everything else is coming from China and Russia towards West, rather than from what we have is a classic example. I'm sure you have talked about it in your classes, where we have one power kind of descending and another power ascending. Yeah. And Turkey finds its role somewhere in the middle. If would have stuck to the old power, the descending power, it would have sunk with it.
Right.
And had no other alternative but to navigate and swallow the pill that its policy failed in the region, but at least salvage whatever it can by now shifting towards China, shifting towards towards Russia, towards Iran. I mean, who would have thought that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Erdogan gives a hint that it's prepared to sit with Bashar al-Assad and resolve the Syrian crisis. 2 days ago, Bashar al-Assad made the final condition. The only way that he is going to sit down with Erdogan is with a clear timeline of withdrawal of Turkish troops from northern Syria and stopping the support for the terrorists in Idlib.
In Idlib province in the northwest, yes.
So these are all factors. I don't know how much one has time to spend, but certainly it's a complex issue, both economic, social, political, and everything else. Erdogan has realized, as you have indicated, that there is no hope in the West.
Right.
In a meeting that he had with Ayatollah Khamenei in Tehran many years ago, Ayatollah Khamenei reminded him. He said, don't, in a sense, be deceived. Didn't say don't be fooled. Don't be deceived by the glamour of United States or the other European countries. It's all hype. If you want power, if you want friend, if you want somehow a solid base, it's within the region and east.
Well, it sounds like that Erdogan took Khomeini's advice.
Some of it, yes.
At least in part. It certainly appears to me that these shifts, this shift in Turkish policy, this Turkish tango, is a very strong element. Is just pure and simple opportunism, where where the opportunities are for growth. It's not. I wouldn't necessarily call it a principled a shift in policy or principled vision. There's something about it, though, that I'd like to hear your take on it, because in this world where it's so polarized today, and where Bush said you're either with us or against us, this polarized world, this unipolar approach that is that of the United States. Can Turkey really continue to be both in NATO on the one hand and part of the Belt and Road Initiative and good neutrality with in terms of the Ukraine conflict and good relations with Russia? It seems to me that it's walking a tightrope. And how long can it continue to do that? I don't know. He's done it rather well, opportunism aside, up until now. But, what I noticed is just before this current election, how Biden came out and publicly wished that Erdogan would be defeated, which was, I don't think it was the smartest thing he ever did. But
nothing comes out of Biden as smart. I mean, that's not his classic. But one thing which, I mean, reflecting on this particular point, I believe NATO, if it wasn't for this factor, that's my understanding, if it wasn't for the huge investment that the West has done in Turkey, under normal circumstance, NATO would not have tolerated what Turkey is doing in the region and how it's shifting away from them and causing a huge amount of problem for the additional members, and with standing to a degree, not condemning outrightly the way NATO wanted Russia and everything else that is happening. If it wasn't for the huge investment in Turkey, I think NATO would have given up on Erdogan and Turkey. But they have no other alternative but somehow to accept that this unruly kind of, call it whatever, member of the Union is there, and they have to deal with it. And Erdogan knows of this economic leverage. This is why he's pushing it and trying to see an alternative way or an alternative source. Now you have China with $2 trillion of cash to be invested around the world. If they can bring some of that back. I was watching a program, the Chinese, regarding the railroad that is coming, the new part of the Silk Road that they are creating. The railroad is going into Iran, through Iraq, straight to Turkey.
Yes. Yes.
And it is, the Russians are supporting it as an alternative way of what we call global transportation that bypasses Suez Canal.
Right. Both the North-South corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative and East-West corridor, both of which go through Turkey. And here's where the dynamism is, if you like. It's in Eurasia, and Turkey is very well located for that. I was noticing one other thing, kind of before we wind down here, and that is that Turkey is applied to be part of the BRICS network.
Yeah.
Brazil, Russia, Iran, China, and South Africa, and that it's applied. Interestingly enough, there's 3 Middle Eastern countries that are applying. Saudi Arabia,
yeah.
Egypt, and Turkey.
Egypt.
And three what were considered some of the more solid allies of Washington, right? Applying for this body, which is really non-aligned in many ways. And that raises, just, if you like, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what I see happening. Is not only did the U.S. position in Syria was essentially it's the United States that's defeated in Syria, or U.S. influence is defeated, and now we see these U.S. allies. Tunisia, little Tunisia too, is also trying to join the BRICS. Algeria. So it looks to me like the United States influence in the Middle East, when we've talked about this, that it's declining, and it's declining with a rapidity that is quite impressive. And they don't seem to know what to do about it. Is that a fair estimate on your part?
It's totally correct. I mean, when you have Chinese being able to create the relationship between so quickly between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the Iranian and Saudi Arabian government, both the day before yesterday, Saudi foreign minister was in Tehran opening up the new embassy, and last week Iranian delegations were in Riyadh opening up their embassy. Huge amount of promise of huge amount of investment by the Saudis in the infrastructure, particularly gas and oil in Iran. Both of these resources and lithium mine that recently discovered in Iran, both of these resources that the Chinese are supporting as well. And Americans are unable to do anything. The worst, call it, blow to U.S. Regional influence would be if the Iranians and the Egyptians are able to establish a relationship. This biggest.
I think I read something that Egypt is starting to negotiate with Iran. I believe.
Yes.
Iran, is that right?
Yes.
Sure.
Through Omani government.
Yes.
And the biggest Arab country and biggest non-Arab power in the region, if they could work together, and with the finance coming from Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, and everything else, it's a new Middle East that the United States. I mean, the pontification of Condoleezza Rice that is going to be a new Middle East is coming back to take shape. And your initial title that we are beginning to witness the Arab Spring, but from the top rather than from the bottom.
Right.
This is taking shape, but not the way United States wanted.
Oh, no, not at all. Yes.
It's a totally new dynamic.
Do you have any closing remarks, Ibrahim, about Turkey and its geopolitical role in the region before we end this particular broadcast?
I think one has to criticize Erdogan and at the same time give him credit.
Yes.
Criticize Erdogan for having that desire to glorify himself and Turkey for being the new power. But one has to give him credit that as soon as he realized that the old policy has failed, immediately shifted away from the old policy and is seeking and sought a replacement for the old policy that may not give him that grandeur, but at least there is a degree of acceptability by the regional powers and work with them. But Turkey's role is complex that we really need to spend some time more in discussing it.
I agree, and my final comment is he's gone from a kind of expansionist idealism, which is a polite way of putting it, to a kind of realism, and that's impressive to me because that doesn't usually happen. And Turkey's future is stronger because he has become more realistic. So there's that part of it. And when we talk about Turkey, I mean, Turkey is really a case. We could have used any one of these other countries. We could have talked about Egypt. We could have talked about Saudi Arabia. These are all countries that are moving geopolitically. The changes that they're going through are so profound, and they're happening so quickly that it's hard to keep up with it. But we're going to try and keep up with it in not only in this program, but in programs to come. So, dear listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll be back again with more programs. Ibrahim, good night. You take care.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you, listeners.